Okay, in this presentation, I just want to go through your answers from the reading test, make some comments about that, and to help you think about how you can improve your grade in this class. Um, I'm going to start with just kind of your general ideas about what you think the law is. I'm going to help you understand why this is not quite right, and I can try to lead you into a way of thinking that's very different than probably what you've done so far in college. So I want to remind you the two best resources for you to improve on your own or to practice is one, the final exam worksheet that gives you a series of examples and explanations, and then gives you a little an assignment that I can kind of look at and see how you're doing. You can do this more than once. The other thing is to, if you need a book, some students require a book. Um, the book that I think would be best for you is called The Politics of Rights, which really gets into something called the myth of rights or the myth of law. Many of you, as I'm going to show you, are getting your ideas about what law is, what courts are, from TV, from your families, and from your friends. And so these are good for you in that they've helped you maintain good social relationships, hopefully, but they are not valid information as to the way that lawyers and judges think, which is really the point of this class. So of the students who completed the assignment on time, there was three types of student responses. So let me go through the three types and show you kind of what's wrong with each of them. This is not shocking, right? You're new to this class, you're new to legal reasoning, and so you're going to make some mistakes. So let me show you what those are. The first one is that law is not about argumentation, right? So just because you can argue against something doesn't mean that you're right in your argument. So if you're looking at the readings as a whole and saying that they're all one-sided, I want you to challenge yourself there and think about how an argument can be sided, right? It's not a triangle. Um, and what do you really mean by that, right? So I think what you mean is that it's some kind of an opinion, and that's certainly true of the first reading. But to classify all of the readings that way would be incorrect. Um, Now, the problem here is this kind of fallacy called, just because something can be argued means that there's something wrong with the piece of information. So that's not true. Um, it's also unclear in this answer. So even if I was going to try to give you the benefit of the doubt in this answer, and there's actually a couple of these answers, um, you need to say what you're arguing against, right? Just to say that something can be argued is something called tautology, meaning it's true in every single situation. So you can argue against gravity. However, if I push you off of a building, you're going to fall whether you believe in gravity or not. And you can argue all the way down to the ground when you smack and die. So I think, what I'm trying to get you to see here is in this class, we're not trying to think about arguing and about opinions. That's not what this class is about. I know that some of your other classes either are that way or they can feel that way. But again, I want to be clear that is not what this class is about. What you're trying to do is figure out a rule of which the person is making their reasoning against or for, right? So it seems like it's an argument, but the rule is the thing that we don't argue with. So let me just show you what that means, right? So this student gave the answer that the teacher wants to see. In other words, they learned from the exam. They saw what the right answers were in the multiple choice, and then they put them together. There's nothing wrong with this as a practice for your own time, right? But I wonder whether you're going to be able to now state this in your own words, which is really what that last question was asking. So even between the two answers I've had so far, I kind of actually prefer the first one because at least the person is saying what they think, and I can work with that, right? I can show you that we can have a great debate in our history class, but on the other hand, right, in this class, we're not arguing about history. We're not arguing about points of view. You have to try to incorporate multiple points of view. This answer, on the other hand, kind of is just the facts, right? Here we are. We just have some facts. So, this is more or less correct. So Rule 11 is basically used by lawyers and judges against people bringing false claims. Now, should that happen in every case? That's a different question, right? The next thing is kind of like the basketball example. Um, Basically, the argument in that is implied in that article is that without rules, the players really probably wouldn't enjoy the game or they wouldn't play the game. Another way of thinking about it is the scientific way, right? So it's not an argument. It's go and watch any game. Watch a game with little kids, right? They make rules up as they go. They argue about the rules. They argue about fairness. They argue about their rights, right? They do all this stuff. So what this article is really saying is that this is something that is an evolutionary trait of human beings. So it's not about the content of the rules, and it's not about the sport. Doesn't matter if it's basketball, if it's cheerleading, if it's fashion, right? People arguing about fashion. People argue about rules and what constitutes good or bad to make meaning out of the situation, and that's what you really need to understand from that reading. The CSI science one, and again, this is what when we're saying CSI, we mean the TV show, right? So the problem is that TV show, along with understandings that come from TV, are too simple, right? And so that gives people the impression that that's the way that crime scene investigations actually occur in real life, and that's not how they occur. In fact, most situations they don't occur at all. And so you need to think about how to start unpacking these ideas that you got from media, that you got from your family and friends, and why that it's not that they're quote unquote wrong, right? It's that they're incomplete, right? They don't tell a large part of the story. So you're missing a bunch of information from your knowledge. And then finally, I like the fact that the student really keyed in on the talking back part, right? And this is because this is a part of the law that I guess a lot of students either weren't taught or just this is not in your background. But in the Western English tradition, the right to resist is the fundamental building block of which law is built upon, right? So without the right to resist, there is no such thing as law in the West. I know that in other places it's the opposite, right? The law is simply a command. And so we can talk about that in this class, and you can think about that more. But again, this is about the U.S. judicial system, which again is based on the Western English tradition in the Magna Carta of the right to resist, right? So there's an inherent or a natural right to stand up for yourself and to live your own life. And so, the person stands outside of the law. And so when people come together in the Black Lives Matter protest, it is about trying to explain that if all life is going to matter, if that's a fundamental right that all people have, then certainly one part of the population is going to have to matter. And so if one part of the population is being targeted and killed, then that means the whole population is threatened. Now, there's lots of different ways of saying that. But the main point here is that as long as Black lives don't matter, then all lives don't matter. And so it's a way of thinking about it that's different than, say, Black lives versus blue lives. Of course, there's no such thing as a blue life, right? That's a costume or a uniform or whatever you want to call it that people wear, right? If we say Black Lives Matters, we don't mean judges because they wear black robes, right? So we're also not really talking about culture. We're not talking about the killing off of black culture, right? We're talking about human beings, right? Human bodies. So unless you see the kind of numbers of police officers getting executed that you see black people getting executed in the streets, that statement just doesn't really make any sense. Blue lives matter. I know it's rhetoric. I know it's politics. I know it has nothing to do with science or accuracy. But I'm just trying to make the point here that article was really talking about the historical right to resist and how Black Lives Matter is taking on that mantle. Again, we're not talking about the strategies. We're not talking about mistakes. We're not talking about opinions. We're talking about the scientific fact that the law is based in the right to resist, and there wouldn't be a law without it. So what I think was, kind of interesting, but not quite right, is this other example. This one I like because the student really tried to get into the depth of the readings and try to make sense in their own world. That's what I'm trying to get you to do. So the first two answers didn't quite do that. This one is good, but again, the opinion is unbased, right? So it could be correct that we could find information that says without changing the economy, we're going to go back into the same situation. But that's not what these articles were about. So you're reasoning from something, but you're not showing me that you understood the reasoning from these articles. So in other words, you might be getting ahead of yourself. So I think all three of these, right, are trying to make sense of the material in a way that is, I think, pleasing to the instructor. But it's not clear to me that you're actually understanding the reading at all. And that's the difficulty. My job is not to like your answer or agree with your answer. My job is to see, are you following the structure of the answer that this course is trying to teach, right? So in biology, for example, the teacher should not be judging you based on what clothing you're wearing as you're doing the scientific experiment. They should be judging you based on, are you following the instructions of the scientific experiment? And that process is different than legal reasoning. So, there's a lot going on there, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but those are the three categories of student answers. Now, going through the readings, I just want to highlight a few things, mostly because a student asked me to do this, so I'm responding to you. So as you can see, right, students struggled. A rule that says that lawyers may bring lawsuits they know to be without merit. It seems like you got that backwards, right? So this is maybe a case of reading more carefully. So let's get to what this thing is. Now, first of all, this is a journalism editorial, right? So there's a difference here between what I'll show you here is one should bring a Rule 11, right? That doesn't mean it's automatically going to apply. I'm trying to attack your idea that rights automatically apply. They don't, right? Whether people do or do not bring claims is obviously a choice. And sometimes they don't bring a claim because they don't know it exists. But I was recently asked by a family member a variety of questions about what Donald Trump was doing, what Mike Pence was doing, and what Democrats were doing. And they asked this question, is what they're doing legal? Well, that's not how law works. And so, the number one answer that a lawyer should give you before you've given them the money to do the research to come up with the answer, the legal answer, is to say it depends, right? To simply say that Donald Trump is violating the Constitution, Abraham Lincoln violated the Constitution. Harry Truman violated the Constitution. George W. Bush violated the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson violated the Constitution. This is not my opinion. These are the things that the Supreme Court said, right? To my knowledge, the Supreme Court has only said that Donald Trump violated the Constitution in the case of the illegal ban against Muslims. And they made some small arguments there that could suggest that it was possible that he could do that. So in other words, law does not say yes or no. There's never a yes or no answer in law, or very rarely. There's a lot of different kind of exceptions and complications. So in this article, all you really need to think about is, the author is using a legal rule. So the legal rule, right, which is all I'm trying to get you to understand in this class, is that a lawyer may not bring a case that they know to be without merit. Now, you have to think about this for a second from common sense. Why would a lawyer do this? One person might say, well, maybe they don't know. Well, then maybe they shouldn't be a lawyer, right? So that's not a very good argument. So the lawyer is doing this because they think they can get away with it. And so in other words, they're doing this just to get attention in the media. I'm thinking of Rudy Giuliani here, who really doesn't have a career anymore, right? He's retired. It doesn't really matter what he does. He's a much older man, right? So it would probably be a good idea to bring sanctions against that person to say, stop, right? Stop what you're doing. On the other hand, if a younger, brand new attorney made a mistake, and they thought they were making an argument, they just were making it incorrectly, and it turns out that they don't have any merit or they didn't have any case, then the other lawyer would bring something called a motion to dismiss. So they wouldn't sanction the lawyer, they would just dismiss the case. So this issue here is this old Latin phrase, right? Ought implies can. Just because a lawyer may bring sanctions or a judge may bring sanctions doesn't mean they can, right? There could be other reasons why they cannot. They could be political reasons, they could be religious reasons, they could be social reasons, they could be physical reasons. But the idea here is this old Latin phrase that we should be realistic in proposing our legal and moral rules. So if our standard of Rule 11 sanctions is that lawyers should not bring claims that they know to be without merit, that should be based on some kind of reasoning. The reasoning or the realistic backing behind this legal rule is that lawyers can be disbarred. Their license can be taken away from them. So if a judge or a lawyer brings a Rule 11 sanction, that means the Bar Association is now going to look at the license that this lawyer is carrying and decide whether that lawyer should continue to be a lawyer. So the important thing to remember here is not all legal rules are moral rules, and vice versa. Not all moral rules are legal rules. Most legal rules are not moral rules, right? Like you must file a complaint within 21 days of, blah, blah, blah. That's not a moral rule. That's not saying anything about, whether you're a good or bad person. That's purely procedural or formal. That is the majority of most legal rules. Let that sink in. Now, a lot of people got this one wrong. I'm going to say this is probably because you didn't read the article carefully. And so, there's not much more I can say about that. Read things more carefully. Many of you said that these articles were difficult. Correct, right? This is college. This is an upper level college class. To be honest with you, this class tends to be taught at the junior level. So you're kind of taking a class a little earlier than maybe you would if you were in the 4-year institution without going to community college. But you did register for this class and it is required for many of you. And another thing just to say, a lot of students who transfer to the 4-year college end up emailing us, the professors, and saying they weren't ready. And so part of not being ready is not reading carefully. And so you need to get into the habit of reading carefully now. The old rule that professors tend to give is for every subject, so this class, right, is one subject, it meets 3 hours. It's 3 hours worth of work multiplied by 3. So you should be spending 9 hours a week on this course. Some of you are saying that's not possible for me. I understand. So you're going to have to figure out some cheating of ways of learning the content faster. And I'll show you one of those ways. I'm cheating as I'm joking. I'm not really serious about cheating. The main point of this thing that I want you to remember here of the basketball article is that law or legal rules are only one way of making meaning, but they are one way of making meaning. So in other words, people understand reality. They understand their social relations based on rules. So with rules, people behave differently. And usually they're more invested in the process, especially if they get to participate in making the rules. So content of the rules is not as important as the process of making them. And I'll let you think about that a bit, but try to think about it in your relationships with your family and your friends. If a parent, but because I said so, or a friend says, well, I'm never going to talk to you again because you did this, you probably didn't participate in making that rule, right? Otherwise, you'd be more likely to follow that rule. Now, in this country, a law is not democratic unless it has two parts. It is equally applied to all. So, there are no exceptions. People don't get away with something simply because they have more money or because they're, quote unquote, powerful. And it also needs to be constructed by all. Now, this one's complicated because this is where now your opinion does kind of matter. Do you think that you should vote for somebody and let them make the rules for you? Okay, so that makes you a Republican in the small r, not necessarily like a social conservative, but in the classical sense, a Republican. Or do you think everybody should participate in the making of all rules? That would make you a small d Democrat. Now, some of you you didn't know that was the difference, but that is the difference, right? And we live in we have a constitution, Republican, R, right? We vote for our representatives, small r, democracy. So people get to participate in a lot of areas that, a Republican form of government would not allow. Again, this is not the same thing as being a Republican or a Democrat, although there are some overlaps, right? Republicans tend to believe in limited representation. Democrats tend to believe in letting everybody participate. The other thing I want you to think about in that article is you don't need to like the sport. That's irrelevant. You don't even have to like the rule. You don't have to like the venue for the rule, where it's being implemented, for it to be meaningful to you. You only need to participate or suffer the consequences. So, even if you were like there to support your boyfriend or girlfriend, right, who's playing the sport, if they get fouled or if they get harmed, or if somebody's taking advantage of them, or you feel like there's some cheating going on, you're participating as an audience member, right? And so you can like start to gauge the meaningfulness of these rules just simply from watching. And many of you just watch politics. You just watch democracy. You just watch the things going on. So that's part of making meaning, right? And you're trying to understand what the rules are from the distance. Now, the more you participate in making rules, obviously, the more that you'll care about them, the more that they'll be meaningful to you. So, those people who care about buying a home are more interested in how a home, is supposed to be purchased, how it's supposed to accumulate value, how you get a mortgage, all those things. So, in other words, rulemaking is constant, okay, but it means more to people who participate in constructing them. This one, it's the third semester I've used this reading, and it's really hard for students to grasp. The problem is, and I'm just going to get right to it, it's not, CSI is wrong because it's too simplistic, right? But, and this is the most important part of that article, people still believe in it. So even though people know that TV isn't real, they still act as if TV was real. And so their expectations are based in non-reality. And in reality, most crimes are never solved. Okay, most crimes don't get closed. There isn't, a grand celebration with a nice theme music that comes on at the end. Most of the time, crimes just aren't solved. And further, most crimes are just never reported. People never actually report the crime, which is a good reason for it not to be solved, right? So you have to think about, there's a lot of reasons in your sociology class. You can talk about why people don't report crimes. But that never happens on TV, right? Most crimes are solved within 30 minutes or an hour, and they're always reported promptly, and the police always show up quickly. That is not reality. And so that's one level, right? You need to understand that's not reality. But the second understanding you need to have, the scientific finding, is most people still act as if it is reality. So that gives us a lot of complicated issues then, if we're going to, let's think like judges and lawyers. We have issues of wrongful conviction, unfair bail practices, overloaded public defenders, plea bargains, racism, sexism, classism, and access to courts and legal knowledge. Reality is ugly. So lawyers and judges have to deal with just a mess all the time. It's never like TV. And so you really have to get out of this mindset for this class, right? For this class, you have to think about this is going to be complicated. It's not one side of an argument. It's not two sides of an argument. It's not even three sides. It's 300 million sides, right? People have all sorts of contradictory ideas about all sorts of things. That's why lawyers and judges follow a process, right? As opposed to just doing what they feel is right. Now, this one most people actually seem to get, which is good. It might be because of, it's a popular event going on, so people are thinking deeply about it. But the main point here is that there's no causal relationship between Black Lives Matter and defund the police. Now, are people using defund the police as political rhetoric in the Black Lives Matter movement? Sometimes, but not at all levels. The point here is to remember that they're two separate things, right? They could be related. They could have a family resemblance, but they're not causal, right? One does not cause the other. So a lot of this is like, I set you up, a lot of you, to see if you fell for the bait, right? You need to watch out for your bias. Everybody is biased. Every single human is biased. Let me keep saying that, right? Every single human being is biased. There's no such thing as a neutral person. But what you can do is account for your bias. So I can say something like, I am a white male. Therefore, it's going to be harder for me to think about what it's like to be a Black female. However, if I'm in a court of law, I should probably just interview or bring in a witness who's a Black female who could talk about her experience, right? That's how I'm watching out for my bias. I'm thinking. I'm engaging. I have a dialogue. I'm not just having monologues all the time, arguing with people on, social media, or not even people, arguing with robots on social media. So the point here is to remember that policing is political, law is political, courts are political, human existence is political. Politics, politics, politics. You don't have to like it. Remember, the rules are the rules, whether you like them or not. But politics is the struggle for power, right? And power is a field of social relations where roles are often unequal, right? Power is something that's kind of like spiritual in a way, right? So you're struggling for power and you're trying to get some kind of persuasive argument. You're trying to get some authority. You're trying to get some piece of paper, right? So it presents itself in many different ways. It's like Casper the Ghost appears out of the middle of nowhere, right? But almost always it's unequal power relationships. So in other words, the person who has the gun has more power than you in that circumstance, right? The person who has the authority, right? They have a costume and a badge. They have more power than you in that situation. The person who is at the head of the classroom has more power than you in that situation. The person who is paying your bills and you live in their house, right? You see how this kind of works. This is always a struggle in these power relationships. And the point here is that there's a historical legal right to resist the abuse of power, right? When people use their power unfairly, they break the rules, they don't do what they're supposed to do according to your expectations. And then there's a historical right to control social relations. Otherwise, there'd be no point of having government, right? So these two things are always in a tension. And it'd be nice if they'd be in balance. I'm not sure if that's realistic. Okay, but it's something to think about, right? That there's this struggle, and perhaps there's a way to get there to be a balance. But that's what you'd have to think about, and that's largely what a judge and a lawyer are trying to do. They're trying to bring that back into balance. So now, what you should know by now, for an A, right? If you want to be a C student, then disregard what I'm about to say. Turn this off. I wonder if you're ever listening in the first place. That's a little joke. But I assume that most students want to improve, right? That's why I'm kind of trying to make this point clear. I think every student can get an A, right? And so I want you to try to see, what do I need to do to be able to get to that point? So law is not about arguing, right? This is the myth of rights. So if this is super hard for you to understand and you need a book, this is the Shine Gold Politics of Rights, right? You can read all about this. Human existence is about arguing, right? So people argue about the law, they argue about politics, but they argue about all sorts of things, right? I've heard people argue about whether I like chocolate. Now that confuses me, right? Why? How could they know? But this is the thing. People love arguing. But I go back to that first statement. Just because a fool can argue doesn't mean that the fool is right. And so law, the way that you need to think about it, it's a tool for communication, right? And so it's one form of legal reasoning that takes many lawyers and judges years to get good at, right? They practice this over and over and over again. A lot of it is you have to try to get out of the habit and routine that you've kind of built up over the years. It's a different way of thinking. So I'm not expecting you to be perfect at this. I'm supposed to see whether you make some change, right? Are you making some progress? The main thing is you just have to try to think from things from multiple points of view. Many of you are seeing like the whole world is divided into two. And that's just not based on reality, right? That's not lived experience, right? You don't have the same lived experience as one other person, okay? So every single part of you is going to be different. And that's a biological fact. So this is not a class about defending your gut feelings, right? This is not a point and counterpoint kind of class. It's not debate. It's not high school. This is a college level class, right? You're supposed to be learning academic theories. So you have to accept the reality that most of your knowledge up to now is based in myths. Now, these are helpful myths, right? Don't cross the street without holding your mother's hand. What a great myth. But by now you've probably jaywalked so many times that you don't really believe in that myth anymore, right? So they're helpful, but they're incomplete for your knowledge, right? Which college is about learning more, about gaining more knowledge. So you have to either amend that point of view that you have. You can argue that the myth of rights should be true, right? Wouldn't it be lovely if we lived in an ideal society where everybody's rights were always paid attention to? But that's not real, right? So we have to expand our knowledge and open our mind to multiple ways of existing and experiencing the law, not just the one that you believe in. So one key to success in college is learning how to learn, not learning what to learn, learning how to learn, right? So any single piece of information is going to have multiple ways of understanding it. This isn't the same thing as having multiple opinions. This is meaning multiple ways of understanding it. In biology class, for example, you might learn about ovaries as part of the reproductive system. Not everybody is going to understand that the same way. Some individuals are going to have direct experience about what that means. Other people are going to have to imagine what it might mean. Sadly, some people are going to not even try to think about it. And that's what I'm trying to get you out of. You need to think about what it's like to be different people in this system. So, the main point here is that academic articles are different. And when teachers are trying to get you to get good citations, the reasons why they want you to get academic articles is because these products of knowledge go through a very extensive review process. In many of the articles that I've published, it takes a year or more for multiple people to review the work. Okay, so it's not just a bunch of opinions. These are all based on scientific processes. And so they mostly look at the methods, right? What was the method for coming up with the conclusions that the author came up with? So you can't argue with the conclusions. You might be able to argue with the methods, but if you argue with the methods, you'd have to have read every single citation that the author puts forward, because that's the process of academic literature, right? So in one of the articles that I wrote, one of the reviewers said, well, there's been 2 new articles that I didn't know existed yet, right? They had just come out that call into question a couple of the points you made. So I had to go read those articles and see what did they do. And they cited to 3 or 4 articles that I'd never read. So then I had to read those articles, right? And I didn't really argue with them so much as I saw it from a different perspective, right? And so I added to what they were saying. That's how you build knowledge in this environment, in this academic environment. As you learn more things, it becomes less likely that you're going to go around arguing with people. Hence the quote at the beginning, right? People who don't know much tend to argue a lot. And we could think about the social dynamics of that. Now, you're of course free to develop your argument. That's your right, under the First Amendment. However, again, this is about getting an A in class, not being a smart aleck, right? So what you need to be thinking about is, what is the main point of the article, right? So you should be using a highlighter if you're printing this, or Adobe, which CUNY offers you for free, has a highlighter function. You should be doing that. It's called annotating. One kind of skill that you learn from using this technique is that you don't need to remember everything. You need to be highlighting the most important things and really focusing in on what those things are. And so I gave you those, that was kind of the trick of the multiple choice. I gave you the main points. So for those of you who got it wrong, you need to go back through those articles and use the highlighter function. Find the right answer and then look around there to see what did you misunderstand, right? Because that's all that we're talking about now, is like not quite understanding the content in the right way, right? The how part is the one that most of you are struggling with. And in my 10 years of teaching at Kingsborough, it takes a couple weeks to switch from one way of thinking into another. Kind of common sense, right? If you go to the gym, it takes a couple weeks to get into a new routine. It doesn't happen automatically. Now, this is where it gets super complicated, right? By the way, there are 51 constitutions in the United States. Each state gets its constitution. And then the federal constitution is the one that's the overarching, right? So I don't want you to think about whether you got this question right or wrong. I want you to look at the diversity of answers to both of these questions, right? This is what judges have to deal with, right? So ordinary folks have ideas about the law, and that's who we see, right? Lawyers and judges, we see ordinary folks. We're not going to court with other lawyers and judges. It's the vast majority of the population. And so, people care about very different things. And they have different information and different knowledges about the system itself. And so one of the things I have to get you to, as you learn about the specifics, is to also understand that in this form of government, this constitutional republican democracy, um, the process of following the rules as a judge, the way that they interpret documents, things like that, is more important than the content of the claim. And that's why, when people ask me those kind of questions, like, could Pence have, argued that the election was fraudulent? No. No. Uh, Not legally, but could he have done it in real life? Sure. And you saw two senators try to do that. I mean, nothing stops them from violating the rules, right? And that's the big thing I'm trying to get you guys out of, is that just because there are rules doesn't mean people are going to follow them. But judges, right, tend to follow the rules. I mean, that should be kind of obvious, right? But the rules that they follow are process rules, not content rules. Now, I want to end with an interesting student insight. This student really starts to grasp what I'm trying to get at in this class, and I might be a student I've had in the past. So, it's like the more you work in this area of law, the easier this work becomes. But the student understood, and this is good, right? Because this is the rule we're getting at, is the people treat the same actions in different scenarios in different ways. They're just using different words for it, right? So, what I was joking about with somebody recently was that, when you're on the playground as a kid, there always seemed to be the one kid who felt like there was some rule violation at like the beginning of the game, but they didn't say anything until after they lost the game. And then when they lost the game, suddenly they have all the reasons why they lost. And it's because the rules weren't fair, people were cheating, and there's always that one kid, right? There could be 30 kids all playing together, and there's always that one kid. And so there's always at least 3 or 4 kids that say to that kid, why didn't you bring this up at the beginning? Okay. There's also another kid that will be like, be cheating the whole time. And then a few other kids see that kid is cheating, and so they cheat too, and then they win by cheating. And then that kid says, well, that's not fair, you guys cheated. So then like 10 or 15 kids say, yeah, but you were cheating the whole time too. This is what this student is able to see, right? Is that people interpret rule breaking differently, but they do it in groups, and they do it using the language that they have in that group for what they think is the same action, which is cheating. And so this is the main point. It doesn't matter if it's in basketball, again, if it's in fashion, if it's in TV, it doesn't really matter, right? In dating, right? All that matters is that people kind of use this process of rulemaking in a way. Now, I'm skipping the part that made me realize how stupid I am, right? But I want everybody to see that, because many of you feel this way, because I talked to thousands of students over the years. Yeah, but I felt stupid when I started learning it too. Just like I felt really stupid in biology when I was like, what are these words? That's part of learning how to learn, right? Learning how to get new information and put it into your brain, and apply it in different ways. So that's a good sign. When you realize that the stuff is new and hard, then you're learning. You're going through the right process. I also like that they were able to put together this second kind of interesting understanding, right? That there's still a group that decides to use different symbols, different language, and different rules to make a claim for racism and supremacy, to try to make a claim that they're better, and that this isn't based on heritage. This is not something that is based in biological reality. It's something that they're constructing. They're saying, we want to make believe that there existed some other perfect place where we were in control, and so therefore we should be in control again 200 years later. I want you to think about this as you look at the student zines. What are the symbols and the language that the students are using that show you what they believe about the law? And think about how this relates to their social group. You should then be doing that for yourself. Many of you might not have realized that you exist within a social group, and that your values and your rule-making ideas come from that group, or in retaliation to that group, right? Because you disregard what they're saying to you. So that's a nutshell. This is as close to the dialogue